11:51 at night. For most people, that's the time you're scrolling through your phone one last time before sleep takes over. For me, it was the moment I was double-checking my flight details, making sure everything was perfect for the trip home. I was stationed in Colorado Springs, serving as an Air Force intelligence officer. My life revolved around reading patterns, identifying threats, and executing precision operations. But that night, the threat didn't come from some foreign adversary or classified briefing. It came from a text message that lit up my phone screen like a grenade going off in the silence of my apartment. I grabbed my phone, expecting the usual pre-holiday chaos from my mother, Megan. Maybe she needed me to pick up wine or bring some fancy cheese she couldn't find locally. Instead, the words on that screen rewrote my entire existence in one brutal sentence. The winter gala is for our high-end investors this year. You don't fit the aesthetic. It's best if you stay in Colorado. I stared at those words until they burned into my retinas. Don't fit the aesthetic. Not we'll miss you, or let's reschedule. Just a cold, corporate-style rejection. I'd been uninvited from Christmas like I was some embarrassing relative they needed to hide from the important people. But here's where it gets even more twisted. Seconds after that text arrived, another notification pinged. My brother Jonathan had posted in the family group chat. A selfie of him in a designer tuxedo, holding expensive scotch, grinning like he'd just won the lottery. The caption read, "Vance Family Gala Prep" with a champagne emoji. And then I saw it. Right below my mother's rejection text, a little heart icon appeared next to Jonathan's name. He'd liked the message. My own brother had seen me get cut from the family and celebrated it with a thumbs up. Most people would have broken down right there. They would have called crying, begging to know what they did wrong, apologizing for existing. But I didn't do any of that. In my line of work, panic is a civilian reaction. When intel comes in, you don't freak out. You assess the situation, verify your sources, and plan your next move with surgical precision. I looked at my half-packed duffel bag sitting on the bed. Then I looked at the snow falling outside my window, thick and heavy like the silence filling my apartment. They thought this text would destroy me. They thought I'd crumble and fade away like I always had before. But they forgot one critical detail. I wasn't just their daughter anymore. I was a trained strategist, and they just handed me the clearest signal I'd ever received in my entire career. I typed one word back. Understood. Then I put the phone face down on my nightstand and walked over to that duffel bag. I zipped it shut, picked it up, and put it back in the closet where it belonged. I wasn't going home for Christmas, but I wasn't staying in Colorado either. Because while they were busy worrying about aesthetics and impressing investors, I was about to start worrying about assets. And trust me, what I was about to uncover would make their little gala look like a children's tea party. I sat there in the silence of my military housing, listening to nothing but the hum of the heating vent fighting against the brutal Colorado winter. I unpacked those bags slowly, folding away the civilian sweaters I wouldn't need, putting away gifts I'd never give. This wasn't the first time my family had pushed me to the sidelines, but it was the first time they'd completely locked me out. And here's the thing that haunted me most. I wasn't even shocked. I wasn't sobbing or calling friends for emotional support. Deep down, I knew this text wasn't some random cruel moment. It was the inevitable conclusion of a 29-year experiment in psychological conditioning. In intelligence work, we study how people get turned, how someone loyal becomes a traitor. It never happens overnight. It's a slow process, a gradual erosion of boundaries. You get drip-fed criticism mixed with just enough praise to keep you hopeful, to keep you believing that if you just try harder, you'll finally be good enough. Psychologists call it the boiling frog syndrome. If you drop a frog into boiling water, it jumps out immediately. But if you place it in room temperature water and slowly raise the heat, degree by degree, it'll sit there until it cooks to death. That frog was me. And my father, Nathaniel, was the one controlling the temperature. I remembered being 23, fresh out of officer training, so incredibly proud of my commission. I'd come home for a weekend visit, wearing my uniform because it meant something to me. It represented sacrifice, discipline, and honor. My father had looked me up and down with this expression of faint disgust, frowned, and said, "It's a bit severe, isn't it? Jonathan is launching a lifestyle brand now. That's exciting." Jonathan's brand was a line of luxury hoodies that never went into production. The designs existed only on his laptop and in my father's imagination. But Nathaniel invested $50,000 in it anyway. Meanwhile, I'd invested my own sweat, blood, and entire future into serving my country, and all I got was a critique about my jacket being too stiff. That was the temperature rising, 1 degree at a time. Then there was the money. That was always the real leverage in our family. Not that they gave money to me, of course. No, I was the one who gave. I was the reliable daughter with the steady government paycheck and the pristine credit score they could exploit. My mind flashed back to 6 years ago when I was home on leave, exhausted from a deployment rotation that had drained every ounce of energy I had. Nathaniel had sat me down in his mahogany-paneled study, pouring me a whiskey I didn't want. He looked stressed, older than I remembered. "Brittany, we have an opportunity to refinance the chalet," he'd said, sliding a thick stack of legal papers across his desk. "Rates are at an all-time low, but because of the business expansion, code for Jonathan's latest failure, my debt-to-income ratio is a little high. I need a cosigner, just a formality to secure the asset for the family legacy." For the family legacy. Those were the magic words, the ones that bypassed every logical defense I had. The loan document sat there on that desk, heavy with obligation and unspoken expectations. The amount was $180,000, a massive, life-altering sum for a 23-year-old. But I looked at my father's face, and for once in my entire life, he wasn't looking at me with disappointment or criticism. He was looking at me with need. He needed me. And I wanted so desperately to be needed by him, to finally be part of the legacy instead of the outsider looking in. So like the well-trained frog I was, I didn't question why the water felt warmer. I picked up that pen and signed my name, Brittany Vance, in clean, careful letters. I thought I was buying my way into their respect. I thought signing those papers would finally secure my place at the family table. Looking down at my hands now, resting on my knees in the dim light of my empty apartment, I realized something that made my stomach turn. The water had boiled away a long time ago. I wasn't part of any legacy. I was just the insurance policy they kept in a drawer, the silent partner who carried all the risk while they enjoyed all the rewards. And now that the aesthetic of their precious gala mattered more than the person who made it financially possible, they thought they could just discard me like yesterday's trash. I stood up and walked to my desk. I opened my laptop and the blue light of the screen illuminated my face. My expression wasn't pale or sad anymore. It was set in a hard, determined line. They thought that text message was the end of our conversation. They thought I would fade away into the background, hurt and silent, just like I always had before. But they forgot one critical thing. When you sign a contract, you don't just take on the debt. You also take on rights. And I wasn't going to cry about being uninvited to some pretentious gala. I was going to find out exactly what I had signed 6 years ago. Something told me that formality my father mentioned was about to become the most important document of my entire life. I sat at my makeshift desk with my server tower humming beside me, the only sound breaking the midnight silence. Brittany Vance, the daughter, had been hurt and confused. But Captain Vance, the intelligence officer, was now fully operational. I logged into my secure cloud storage, bypassing the two-factor authentication with the kind of muscle memory you develop after years in the military. I wasn't looking for classified dossiers or enemy movement patterns this time. I was hunting for something far more dangerous, a PDF file titled Vance Chalet Refinance signed 2019. It took me exactly 3 minutes to locate it buried in a folder I hadn't opened since the day I uploaded it. The file opened, filling my screen with dense legal jargon that would make most people's eyes glaze over. I scrolled past the standard borrower agreements, the interest rate disclosures, the amortization schedules that broke down decades of payments. I wasn't interested in any of that surface-level material. I was looking for the fine print, the clauses buried deep where nobody reads because they trust the people asking them to sign. Trust. What a dangerous word that turned out to be. I found what I was looking for on page 24, hidden under a section labeled Default and Remedies. The heading read Article 14, Section C, Commercial Liability and Asset Protection. The language was technical, deliberately obscure, but my training kicked in. I'd read enough intelligence reports to know when someone was hiding intent behind bureaucratic words. It stated, in the event the primary collateral, meaning the property, is utilized for commercial purposes including but not limited to short-term rentals, hospitality services, or event hosting without the express written consent of the cosigner, said cosigner reserves the right to assume immediate executive control of the property to mitigate liability. The air left my lungs like I'd been punched in the chest. Executive control. Those two words changed everything. My father hadn't just needed my credit score to refinance some family vacation home. He needed a guarantor against his own risky behavior, his own schemes. And in his arrogance, assuming I would never read the contract or never have the spine to enforce it, he'd signed away his authority. He'd handed me the keys to the kingdom without even realizing it. I opened a new browser tab with trembling fingers and typed the Vance Experience Lake Tahoe into the search bar. The results populated instantly, and my jaw tightened with each click. It wasn't just a house anymore. It was a full-blown commercial empire. There it was, plastered across Airbnb, VRBO, and a dozen luxury rental platforms. The Vance Chalet Experience, Alpine Luxury. The photos were professionally shot, glossy images of perfectly staged rooms with mountain views. The description boasted about a curated mountain getaway perfect for corporate retreats and exclusive events. The nightly rate made my blood run cold. $2,500 per night. And when I clicked on the calendar, every single weekend for the next 6 months was fully booked solid. They weren't struggling financially. They weren't barely scraping by. They were raking in tens of thousands of dollars every single month using an asset I was personally liable for. I scrolled through the guest reviews, each one twisting the knife deeper. Amazing venue for our wedding. Host Nathaniel was charming and attentive. The winter gala package is an absolute must for anyone looking to impress clients. They had monetized my credit risk without my knowledge or permission. They were living like royalty in a castle built entirely on my back, profiting from my sacrifice while treating me like I was too embarrassing to be seen at their events. This wasn't just family betrayal anymore. This wasn't some emotional dispute about feeling excluded. This was calculated financial exploitation. They were exposing me to massive legal liability with every booking they accepted. If a guest got injured on that property, if a fire started, if anything went wrong, I would be the one facing lawsuits. My security clearance, my military career, my entire future could be obliterated by their greed. And they'd done it all while smiling to my face, while asking me to keep being the reliable daughter who never caused problems. Rage settled in my chest, not the hot, explosive kind that makes you scream and throw things. This was cold, sharp, surgical rage, the kind that makes you dangerous. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in months. "Mac," I said when he answered, my voice steady and controlled. Major Mackenzie was a JAG officer I'd served with in Germany. He was brilliant, ruthless when necessary, and owed me a favor from an incident I'd helped him resolve 2 years ago. "Brittany, it's midnight. Everything okay?" His voice was groggy but alert. "I need a legal consultation," I said, staring at that Airbnb listing glowing on my screen. "Hypothetically, if I hold a controlling interest clause in a property deed due to unauthorized commercial use, how quickly can I execute an eviction?" I heard the rustle of sheets as he sat up, suddenly very awake. "Hypothetically, if you have proof of the commercial use and the deed is solid, about as fast as you can print the paperwork and serve it." "Why?" His tone had shifted from friendly to professional. "I have the proof," I said, my cursor hovering over the screen. "I have the deed, and I have screenshots of everything." There was a pause. "Who's the target?" Mac asked, his voice sharpening with interest. "My parents," I said quietly. "And Mac, I'm going to need a cease and desist letter drafted for a business called the Vance Experience. Turns out I'm the majority shareholder and nobody bothered to tell me." The call ended with Mac promising to have documents ready within 48 hours. I looked at that packed bag still sitting in my closet. I wasn't staying in Colorado. I was going to Lake Tahoe. And this time I wasn't going as the family disappointment. I was going to war. Lake Tahoe was blindingly white under the winter sun when I arrived 3 days later. I drove my rental car past the chalet without stopping, heading straight for the county clerk's office instead. The air was thin and sharp, cutting through my lungs with every breath. My focus was sharper. In tactical situations, you don't rush the target. You secure the perimeter first. You gather every piece of intel before you make your move. I walked into the clerk's office, my heels clicking on the worn linoleum floor. The woman behind the counter, whose name tag read Barb, looked up with tired eyes. "I need the property records for the Vance Chalet at 42 Alpine Ridge Road," I said, sliding my ID across the counter. She disappeared into a back room and returned with a thick file that landed on the counter with a heavy thud. I flipped past the tax assessments and zoning maps, searching for something specific. Jonathan had been bragging on Instagram for months about the new glamping pods they'd installed in the backyard. Luxury yurts with heated floors and premium amenities. But structures like that require permits, especially in a protected environmental zone like Tahoe. I found the permit applications near the back of the file and my hands started shaking. Application for accessory dwelling units, 4 units. The application was dated 6 months ago. The applicant was listed as Nathaniel Vance, but the signature line that required property owner authorization stopped me cold. There was my name, Brittany Vance, signed in flowing cursive across the authorization line, but it wasn't my handwriting. The loops were too wide, the slant too relaxed and leisurely. I'd signed my name on thousands of military documents over the years. I knew every stroke and angle of my own signature. This was my mother's handwriting. Megan, who prided herself on her perfect penmanship and elegant cursive, had forged my signature on a federal land use document. My vision blurred at the edges as the full weight of what I was seeing hit me like a freight train. This wasn't just a family dispute over an Airbnb listing anymore. This wasn't even just breach of contract or unauthorized commercial use. This was forgery. This was fraud. And because I was a commissioned officer in the United States Air Force holding a top-secret security clearance, having my name attached to a fraudulent federal document could trigger an investigation that would end my career instantly. They hadn't just used my credit without permission. They hadn't just exploited my trust and my money. They had actively risked my freedom, my career, everything I'd worked for my entire adult life. And they'd done it so they could charge an extra $500 per night for some luxury yurts that probably cost them $20,000 to install. The return on investment for destroying their daughter's life must have seemed pretty good to them. I took a photo of the document with my phone, my hands steadier now. Then I looked at Barb. "I need a certified copy of this permit application," I said. She printed it out, stamped it with the official seal, and handed it over. "Is everything okay, hun?" she asked, noticing the color had drained from my face. "No," I said, my voice dangerously calm, "but it's about to be handled." The walk back to my car felt different. Heavier but also faster, like I was being pulled forward by gravity I couldn't control. The sun was setting now, casting long shadows across the snow-covered parking lot. My phone buzzed with a notification from Instagram. Jonathan had just posted a story. "Gala night, the Vances do it best." I clicked on the video and watched my father holding court by an ice sculpture, my mother laughing with a champagne flute in her hand. Guests in black ties and evening gowns filled the background. They were celebrating their theft. They were literally dancing on the grave of my trust while facing zero consequences. I started the car. I didn't drive fast or recklessly. I drove with precision, taking each turn with calculated control. I checked the time on the dashboard, 6:30. The gala was in full swing, probably reaching that peak moment where everyone's just drunk enough to feel invincible. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. I wasn't wearing a gown or fancy jewelry. I was wearing a sharp tailored blazer and dark slacks. My civilian armor. I looked like exactly what I was. A woman who had come to collect a debt that was 6 years overdue. I pulled out of the parking lot and turned onto the road leading up the mountain. The lights of the chalet blazed through the trees ahead, guiding me in like a beacon. They wanted a show for their investors. They wanted aesthetics and performance. Well, I was about to give them a reality check they would never, ever forget. The forgery documents sat in my bag on the passenger seat. The deed with its executive control clause was in my inside pocket. And Major Mackenzie's cease and desist letter was being emailed to me as I drove. Every weapon I needed was loaded and ready. I walked up the heated driveway, my boots crunching softly on the scattered gravel over the ice. The air smelled like pine trees and expensive cologne. A valet in a red jacket rushed toward me, hand outstretched for car keys I didn't have. "Checking in for the gala?" he asked, his eyes scanning my outfit with confusion. I wasn't dressed like the other guests. "Something like that," I said, brushing past him before he could ask follow-up questions. I reached the massive oak front doors. A security guard in a black suit stepped directly into my path. He had a clipboard in one hand and an earpiece in his ear, professional but bored. "Name?" he asked without looking up. "Brittany Vance," I said clearly. He scanned his list, frowned, and looked up at me. "I don't see a Brittany Vance on here. Are you someone's plus one?" His tone suggested I'd made a mistake, that I didn't belong. I pulled the property deed from my inner blazer pocket. I didn't unfold it or explain. I just held it up so he could see the county seal catching the light from the entrance chandelier. "I'm the owner," I said, my voice carrying the kind of authority that doesn't allow for questions. "Step aside." He hesitated for maybe 2 seconds, confusion flickering across his face. In that split second of hesitation, I walked past him and pushed open those heavy doors. The noise hit me first. A wall of jazz music, crystal clear laughter, and the clinking of champagne glasses. The foyer had been completely transformed. A towering Christmas tree dripped with gold ornaments. Waiters in crisp white shirts circulated with silver trays of hors d'oeuvres. It was beautiful in that carefully curated way that costs a fortune. And it was all fake. Every smile, every carefully placed decoration, every word of flattery being exchanged. All of it was a performance built on a foundation of lies and my stolen credit. YouTube. I stood there in the entrance, observing. My father, Nathaniel, was at the center of the main room, laughing loudly at some joke made by a man in an expensive tuxedo. My mother, Megan, glided between groups like a professional hostess, touching arms and smiling with practiced warmth. I felt something strange settle over me. Psychologists call it dissociation, that feeling of watching yourself from outside your body. But maybe it wasn't dissociation. Maybe it was just clarity. For the first time in my life, I was seeing my family for what they truly were. They weren't wealthy. They weren't successful. They were performers, con artists in designer clothes. They had built this entire stage, the chalet, the gala, the lifestyle, on a foundation of debt that belonged to me. They didn't own this room or impress these people through their own merit. They were renting their status, paying for it with my credit score and my future. They were squatters in a fantasy world. And like all fantasies, it only existed as long as the lights stayed on. I was about to cut the power. "Brittany," the voice was sharp, annoyed, cutting through the music. I turned to see Jonathan weaving through the crowd toward me. He was wearing a ridiculous velvet smoking jacket that probably cost more than my monthly rent. His face was flushed from alcohol, his eyes slightly unfocused. "What are you doing here?" he hissed, moving to block me from the view of the main crowd. "Mom said you weren't coming. You're completely ruining the vibe." "The vibe," I repeated, looking at him, really looking at him. He was 32 years old and still playing dress-up with other people's money. "Is that what we're calling federal fraud these days? A vibe?" His expression shifted from annoyance to confusion. "What are you talking about? Just go home, Brittany. You're embarrassing yourself." He reached out to grab my arm, probably planning to escort me out like a security guard removing an unwanted guest. I didn't flinch. I sidestepped him with a fluid motion I'd learned in military self-defense training, leaving him grabbing at empty air. He stumbled forward, spilling his drink all over his precious velvet sleeve. I didn't look back to see his reaction. I walked straight toward the DJ booth in the corner of the room. The music was loud, some smooth jazz cover of a pop song that was probably costing them $500 an hour. The DJ, a young guy in headphones, looked up as I approached his setup. "Cut it," I said. "What?" he shouted over the bass. I didn't repeat myself. I reached past him and pulled the main output cable from the mixer. The music died with a sharp electronic pop that echoed through the room. The silence that followed was heavy, sudden, and absolute. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the space. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Laughter died in people's throats. 100 pairs of eyes turned toward me, standing there by the silent speakers, YouTube +1. My father turned from his conversation, his practiced smile freezing on his face when he saw who was standing in front of the DJ booth. "Brittany," he boomed, his voice echoing in the sudden quiet. He was trying to sound jovial and control. "What is the meaning of this?" I stepped forward into the center of the room, into the space where all those eyes could see me clearly. I didn't shout. I didn't need to. I projected my voice the way I'd been trained. Clear, authoritative, impossible to ignore. "The party is over," I said, looking around at the confused faces of investors and guests. "Everyone needs to leave, now." The silence in the room wasn't just quiet. It was terrified. In my line of work, you learn to read a room in seconds. This room had gone from celebration to confusion to pure fear in less than 10 seconds flat. My father sputtered, his face turning a dangerous shade of red that matched the Christmas decorations. "Excuse me, you don't tell my guests to leave. This is my house." "No," I said, my voice cutting through the space like a razor blade. "It isn't." I pulled the folder from my bag and let it hit the marble-top table with a dull thud that seemed to echo forever. "This property is currently under federal investigation for wire fraud, forgery, and unauthorized commercial use involving a commissioned military officer," I announced, scanning the crowd of wealthy investors. "If you remain on the premises, you may be considered accessories to these felonies. I suggest you vacate immediately." Panic is contagious. I'd seen it in combat zones and crisis situations. One person bolts, then another, and suddenly it's a stampede. One couple near the door grabbed their coats without even saying goodbye. Then another. Then it was a full-blown flood. The investors, the same people my father desperately needed to impress for his business schemes, were fleeing like rats abandoning a sinking ship. They didn't care about the aesthetic anymore or the carefully curated mountain experience. They cared about not getting arrested or associated with federal crimes. Within 3 minutes, the room was completely empty except for the catering staff frantically packing up their equipment and my family. Nathaniel marched toward me, trembling with rage. Spit flew from his mouth as he shouted, "How dare you, you ungrateful, spiteful child, you just ruined me. Do you have any idea who those people were?" His voice cracked on the last word. I didn't flinch or step back. "I don't care who they were," I said coldly. "And I'm not a child, I'm the owner." I flipped the folder open to reveal the deed with its highlighted sections. Article 14, Section C, you turned this house into a commercial hotel without my consent. You breached the contract. That gives me executive control. Then I pulled out the second document, the forged permit with my mother's handwriting pretending to be mine. I held it up so they could all see it clearly. And this, forging my signature on a federal land use application. That's 5 years in federal prison, Dad, minimum. And that's before we even talk about the mortgage fraud and unauthorized commercial activity. Megan gasped, her perfectly manicured hand flying to her mouth. Her champagne glass slipped from her other hand and shattered on the floor. "Brittany, we didn't mean any harm. We just needed the permits quickly for the expansion. We did it for the family. You have to understand." Her voice was desperate, pleading. The perfect hostess mask had completely cracked. "For the family," I laughed, a harsh, humorless sound that didn't sound like it came from me. "You did it for the money. You risked my career, my freedom, my entire life so you could build some luxury yurts and charge tourists an extra $500 per night. You didn't do it for me. You did it to me. There's a difference." Jonathan, who had been sulking by the bar nursing his spilled drink and wounded pride, suddenly looked very sober. The color drained from his face. "Wait, forgery. Mom, you said she signed those permits. You told me Brittany knew about the expansion." He looked between our mother and me, realization finally dawning. "She lied," I said, looking at my brother. "Just like she lied about me not fitting the aesthetic, just like they've been lying about being rich, this whole empire you're so proud of. It's built on my credit and my forged signature. Every dollar they've made came from exploiting me." I looked at my watch deliberately. "You have 60 minutes. Nathaniel's voice came out as a broken whisper. 60 minutes for what? The fight was draining out of him. I could see it happening in real time. "To vacate," I said flatly. "Pack your personal belongings, take your clothes and toiletries, leave everything else. The furniture, the decorations, all of it. Those are business assets now. And since I control the business through executive authority, they stay with the property." Megan's legs gave out. She sank into one of the velvet chairs, her perfect composure shattered. "You can't do this. This is our home. We raised you here." Her voice was small, nothing like the confident woman who'd texted me 3 days ago. "You raised me to be useful," I corrected. "You raised me to sign documents I didn't understand and bail you out of problems I didn't create. You raised me to be your insurance policy. Well, congratulations. The policy just paid out." Now you have 58 minutes. Jonathan tried one last desperate move. Brittany, come on, we're family, you can't actually kick us out on Christmas. He attempted a smile that looked more like a grimace. I stared at him, remembering that heart icon next to Mom's rejection text. You're right, Jonathan, we are family. That's why you liked the message when Mom uninvited me for not fitting the aesthetic. That's family, right? His smile died. He had nothing to say to that. YouTube. I picked up my folder and turned toward the door. The locks will be changed at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. JAG officers will be here at 10 to document the commercial operation for the fraud investigation. I'd suggest you find a hotel. I hear there are some nice places in town. Expensive, but I'm sure you've saved up plenty from all those Airbnb bookings you made in my name. I walked toward the exit, my footsteps echoing in the enormous, now empty room. Brittany, please. My father's voice stopped me at the door. I turned. He looked old suddenly, smaller than I'd ever seen him. We can fix this. We can work something out. I'll put your name on the business properly. We'll split the profits, just don't do this. For a moment, I almost felt something. Pity, maybe. Sadness for what could have been. But then I remembered 6 years of using my credit, months of forging my signature, and 3 days ago when they decided I wasn't good enough to be seen. You had 6 years to work something out, I said quietly. You chose not to. You had 6 years to include me, respect me, or even just tell me the truth. You chose not to. And 3 days ago, you had the chance to be a family. You texted me instead and told me I didn't fit. So no, Dad, we're not working anything out. We're done. You have 55 minutes left. I walked out into the cold night air and didn't look back. I sat in my rental car in the parking lot of a hotel 6 miles from the chalet. The clock on the dashboard read 2:47 a.m. I hadn't slept. My phone had been buzzing constantly with calls and texts from my family, each message more desperate than the last. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I was on a conference call with Major Mackenzie and a real estate attorney named Susan Park, who specialized in property fraud cases. The forgery is the nuclear option, Mac was saying, his voice crisp even at this hour. Once we file the complaint with the county prosecutor, there's no taking it back. Your mother will face federal charges, your father as an accessory. This will destroy them financially and possibly criminally. Susan chimed in. But it also protects you completely. Right now, you're exposed to massive liability. Every guest who stayed there, every event they hosted, you could be sued for any incident. The forgery complaint severs that liability immediately and puts it back on them where it belongs. I stared out at the dark parking lot. What about the property itself? What are my actual options? Susan's voice softened slightly. With the executive control clause and the proven breach of contract, you own it outright for all practical purposes. You can evict them, which you've already initiated. You can shut down the commercial operation, which stops your liability exposure. Or you can take it over properly, get the right permits under your name, and run it legitimately. That would actually be the most financially smart move. The most financially smart move. There was bitter irony in that. I didn't want any of this, I said quietly. I just wanted to go home for Christmas. Mac's voice came through gentle but firm. I know, but they didn't give you that option. They gave you a text message and a locked door, so now you have to decide what you do with the keys they didn't know they handed you 6 years ago. The call ended with a plan in place. File the forgery complaint to protect my security clearance and military career. Execute the eviction to establish legal control. Shut down the Vance experience immediately to stop the liability. And then decide what to do with a multi-million-dollar property I never wanted but now controlled. Over the next 72 hours, everything moved with military precision. The locks were changed. JAG officers documented every forged signature and unauthorized modification. The Airbnb listings were deleted, bookings refunded, and angry guests redirected to other properties. My family tried everything. Nathaniel hired a lawyer who sent threatening letters about elder abuse and family exploitation. It lasted until Susan sent back copies of the forged documents and the unauthorized commercial operation, grossing over $30,000 monthly. The threats stopped immediately. Megan tried the emotional approach, leaving voicemails about how I was destroying the family legacy and breaking her heart. I saved every voicemail as evidence but never responded. Jonathan posted on social media about fake family and betrayal. which was rich coming from the guy who'd hearted my exclusion. The county prosecutor's office opened an investigation into the forged permits. Megan was charged with forgery and making false statements on federal documents. Nathaniel was charged as an accessory and with wire fraud for the unauthorized commercial operation. They both faced potential prison time, but more immediately, they faced the complete collapse of their carefully constructed image. The investors who'd fled the gala. They pulled out of every business deal my father had in progress. The social circle that had fawned over them, gone overnight. Nobody wants to be associated with federal fraud charges. I returned to Colorado Springs 2 weeks later. My apartment felt different, smaller maybe, or maybe I was just different. My commanding officer had been briefed on the situation by JAG to ensure my security clearance wasn't at risk. He'd looked at me across his desk and said, "You handled this by the book, Captain. You protected yourself and the Air Force. That takes guts." I didn't feel gutsy. I felt tired. The financial reality settled in slowly. The chalet was worth approximately $2.8 million. After paying off the remaining loan balance of $160,000 that I'd co-signed, it was a massive asset. Susan advised me to either sell it outright or lease it legitimately to a property management company. Either way, I'd gone from being exploited to being wealthy in a matter of weeks. But the money felt hollow. I would have traded all of it for one honest conversation 6 years ago. I would have traded all of it to have actually been invited home for Christmas. 3 months later, I was back at the chalet. But this time, I wasn't crashing a party or serving eviction notices. I was meeting with a property management company that specialized in legitimate luxury rentals. They'd done all the proper permits under my name, fixed the legal issues, and proposed a partnership where they'd handle operations and I'd receive 60% of the profits. It was clean, legal, and lucrative. Everything my family's operation wasn't. I walked through the rooms alone before the meeting. The space looked different without my mother's decorations and my father's ego filling it. It was just a beautiful house in the mountains. Nothing more, nothing less. I stood in the great room where I'd pulled that DJ cable and watched their empire crumble. The memory felt distant now, like it had happened to someone else. YouTube. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. I almost deleted it, but something made me open it. "This is Megan. I'm using a friend's phone because I know you blocked me. The charges were reduced to misdemeanors. We both got probation and fines. No prison. I thought you'd want to know we're not going to jail because of you." I stared at that message. Because of you. Even now, even after everything, it was still my fault in her mind. I typed back, "You're not going to jail because you took a plea deal. You're on probation because you committed fraud. I didn't do this to you. You did it to yourself when you forged my name. I hope you use this time to figure that out." I hit send and then blocked that number too. I was done being their scapegoat. I was done carrying their shame on top of everything else they'd made me carry. The property management meeting went well. They were impressed with the location and the potential. They didn't know the whole story, just that I'd inherited a complicated family property and wanted to handle it professionally. By the end of the meeting, I'd signed a contract that would generate approximately $15,000 monthly in passive income. Money I'd actually earned through my own boundaries and my willingness to enforce them. I drove away from the chalet for what I thought might be the last time. I didn't feel triumphant or victorious. I felt quiet. Sometimes justice doesn't come with fireworks and celebration. Sometimes it's just the quiet knowledge that you stopped letting people hurt you, that you finally chose yourself after years of being chosen last. The snow was falling again, covering the mountains in fresh white. It looked peaceful, like a reset. My phone rang as I reached the main highway. It was Mac. "Just wanted to check in. How'd the meeting go?" I smiled, the first genuine smile I'd had in weeks. "It went well. Everything's handled. I'm officially a landlord now. How weird is that?" He laughed. "Not weird at all. You earned it. Hey, some of us are getting together for New Year's next week. Low-key thing, just friends. You should come. No family drama, I promise." "I'll be there," I said, and I meant it. I was done spending holidays alone because I didn't fit someone else's aesthetic. I was done shrinking myself to make other people comfortable. I'd spent 29 years as the reliable daughter, the insurance policy, the one who carried everyone else's weight. That version of Brittany Vance was gone. She'd been evicted along with the people who created her. As I drove through the mountains back toward Colorado Springs, I thought about that text from 3 months ago, the one that had started all of this. You don't fit the aesthetic. They'd meant it as an insult, a dismissal. But maybe they were right. I didn't fit their aesthetic of exploitation and fraud. I didn't fit their aesthetic of pretty lies and borrowed wealth. I didn't fit their aesthetic of family built on manipulation. And I was completely fine with that, YouTube. I'd found my own aesthetic. It was called self-respect. It was called boundaries. It was called refusing to be anyone's victim or insurance policy ever again. And unlike their aesthetic, mine didn't require forged signatures or stolen credit to maintain. Mine was built on something real. The snow kept falling and I kept driving forward. Away from the chalet, away from the family that never really saw me, and toward whatever came next. For the first time in my entire life, I had no idea what that would be. And somehow, that felt like freedom.